And here we go. All right. It's April 5th, 2020. I'm Greg Farrar, and you can ask here. Oh, I think I need to mute something here for myself. I'm going to be hearing myself. I've got a few more windows running than usual. All right. Got a real control panel going on here. So I'm going to type something in the chat. And hopefully you can all see it. So let's dive in. I am pleased to say that today it looks like we're going to have reasonable data instead of the last 2 days where I've been struggling with my data sources. I still am seeing doubled data for the latest day in my Corona data scraper, but I think that's deliberate. I think they do that on purpose. I'm not sure why, but it's still happening anyway, and so I'm just automatically removing that now. It does mean that that today on the 5th I will show data only for the 4th, because I believe they collect collect the data at about 10 p.m. Pacific or something like that. And so when you see data for the 4th, it's for all of the 4th. Whereas on this display, when you see data for the 5th, since it's only 9 a.m. on the 5th Pacific time right now, this is really data from the 4th. It's just published on the 5th. Anyway, doesn't matter. Overall, we get the good trends. We're no longer seeing duplicate points. Life is good. So, starting at the country level, we can see, I'm going to start where I normally start, which is at the top. The number of new daily cases by country. United States still leading. This alleged peak of the United States still not appearing, though at least it has a straight line here and not an upward spinning one. I'm going to continue on to per million, which is I think more useful. You can compare countries that way. United States is not the worst per million, per capita. It's Spain. Spain now has the highest number of cases per capita, followed by Belgium. I think Belgium may be new in this top crowd. It has not been a dominant force per capita, even per capita. It's a small country, so it's probably not going to be a dominant force in total numbers, but per capita, Belgium is one of the worst off right now in terms of the number of new cases it's getting each day. However, the good news on this chart is we can see quite a few lines, several lines now that are bending sharply downward. They're bending out to horizontal. They're even turning completely downward as they head to the right. So Italy, for instance, this is what it looks like when you turn a corner. Right here, Italy turned a corner. It no longer is seeing a growth of new cases, and indeed it's seeing a decline of new cases. So Italy is doing well. Similarly with Austria, it looks like, is this line. Austria is seeing it turned a corner March 23rd or so, pretty much. It may still have a very slight upward slant, but it's generally turning downward. So the top ones per capita: Spain, Belgium, Switzerland, and the United States, and then Portugal, and it's pretty spread out here. There are a lot of different numbers for different countries. There aren't really obvious clusters except Spain in its unique position way above the rest of the crowd, with well above the rest of the crowd, with about 180 new cases each day per capita. But my favorite chart is the rope chart. If you look at this shows the trend of the growth rates. So 0 is the target in some sense. At least if you're above 0, it's the target. Countries that are currently below 0 are seeing negative growth rates of new cases each day. Countries that are above 0 are seeing positive growth rates, which indicates exponential growth. Right now, I'm going to zoom way in. Actually, just for a minute, I'll include Turkey, because Turkey has been this very interesting outlier. Turkey at this point is hitting 0, it seems like. It had a very high growth rate for a period, but now for a while it's been better for Turkey. I don't know if we actually have any points below 0 for a while, but its growth rates have dropped to 4 or 5 something percent. It's 10% for a couple days straight. Each of these represents an average of 3 days, but it's a little bit up now. So maybe we're seeing the problem rising in Turkey, but generally the trend has been pretty good for Turkey. So here are all the other ones. Turkey is living in its own world, but everyone else is generally trending downward. This is good. We like to see things trending downward. The world as a whole is clearly trending downward. We have those that are really doing well, like Austria and South Korea right now, with 10% plus, 16% downward, 16% negative 16% growth rate, seeing 16% fewer new cases each day. That will very quickly get them to zero, or at least asymptotically trend them to zero. Australia also doing very well with a negative 12% growth rate according to the trend line. And then we have everyone else, where we have a cluster of, I'll just show the countries that are, I'll include these two because they're close, the ones that are that have pretty much turned the corner. We've got Italy, good to see Italy there, though it's not quite as down as it used to be. I think Italy has had some slight growth in the most recent day, so whereas it was looking more like Australia even yesterday, it's still looking good, but it has a slight uptick. There's some noise always in the data when we're dealing at this level, so that's natural to see some changes in the trend lines day over day, but Italy's still looking good. Spain, similarly, looking even better. It's actually caught Italy. You can see they're converging on this exact point practically. And so Spain is sharply downward in its growth rate. Spain has turned the corner. Portugal, Netherlands, France, all of them pretty solidly downward. Switzerland as well. Switzerland was having, it had this peak for a while where it was looking pretty bad, and it still has a lot of cases. I think if we head up here, we'll see Switzerland is somewhere, yeah, there's Switzerland. Switzerland is third in the world in per capita cases, but unlike the first two, it has leveled off, and you can see it's turned the corner, and that's why we see it below this zero line on the growth graph, on the rope chart. Czech Republic and Turkey also heading in a very positive direction, negative direction, I don't know, heading in a, say, we could be optimistic about the direction they're heading in, because they're almost to zero and they look likely to get there soon. Meanwhile, above the line, we have, these are the two we just talked about. Well, let's go from the top. Russia has the highest growth rate right now, but even Russia is only seeing 17%. So we've seen 40%, 50% some places, 100%. The worst country in the world in current growth rate by trend line is Russia, and it only has 17%. So this is another indicator of how good things are in the way the world is trending. And then Denmark, Brazil. Worth mentioning that Denmark is one of the few, maybe the only here, not quite the only, maybe the only here that's actually headed upwards. Everyone else is headed downwards. They're headed towards turning the corner. Denmark not only has exponential growth, superlinear growth at 13% growth per day in new cases, which is a pretty bad growth rate, though we've seen much worse. But more problematically, Denmark is heading upwards, and so their growth rate is getting worse. At the same time, it's not a sharp upward trend. They were down here, and we can even imagine that there's a little bit of a curve to this line, so this line may be flattening off and then heading back towards zero. So Denmark is really, there's no terrible news on this chart. The world as a whole is going in a good direction, and we'd like to see we have to see everyone below zero before we can say that the world has actually turned a corner, or at least the average. I'm guessing that if we had that chart of the whole world that I've sometimes talked about making but never actually do, I think we would see that the world as a whole is right around the zero line right now. If you look at just the top 5, other than, who's this? Who are you? Germany? Yeah, Germany is kind of flat right now. It's got a reasonably low growth rate, less than 5%, but it's not getting better very fast. It's very slightly downward, but everyone else is either below zero or heading below zero in the top five. And so, in terms of world population, or number of cases, though this is a world population, we have to include things like China, which you'll notice isn't even in the top 25 right now. According to China's reported numbers, they're doing quite well. And India, which also is in the top five, but we keep expecting that may burst onto the scene. We'll see. We're watching that one very closely. But so far, not even the top 25 for India. But yeah, so the general trend of the world is good. In terms of deaths, we see the United States is currently leading the world in new deaths, followed by Spain, followed by Italy, the usual suspects, the United Kingdom and France, and then everyone else. So the people are actually dying in those five countries at a much larger, it's not a larger percentage, we can look at the percentage down here, but the largest number of people in the world, the majority of the people who are dying in these five countries: the United States, Spain, Italy, United Kingdom, and France. If we look by per million, Spain is leading, though. It's nice to see the deaths leveling out here in Spain. We'll see that in the next chart. Italy, well, somewhere near second, we could say. Really, at the moment, Belgium seems to be second. Again, Belgium is showing up as a pretty problematic. It's pretty problematic in its numbers. Where is it on this list? I don't even see it. There it is. So it's about 10th down, but still it's playing a major role because it just has a very large per capita contribution. Small country punching above its weight, I guess, in this epidemic. So here's Belgium and Italy. Italy here again has not just leveled off, it has clearly turned a corner in deaths. We've seen quite a lot of all these little green points show that it's long enough that we can say with some confidence that this is really a trend, that the trend is flat here or down. And so Italy has not just reached its peak of new cases, but it's reached its peak of new deaths, and we can expect the healthcare system to get a break there at this point. And then we have a few others like United Kingdom, Netherlands, next door to Belgium, and France. And let's see, the other kind of big one is Switzerland in terms of per capita deaths. Those are the contributors to per capita deaths. The rope chart, though, where are deaths headed? What is the trend for, are we going to see more or fewer deaths going forward? Right now, with just eyeballing this rope chart, roughly I'd say it's flat to slightly down, very slightly down. There are some countries where the growth in new deaths, like Canada for some reason is leading in the growth of deaths, Australia and Russia. Those three are getting worse, but there are a whole lot that are getting better. They're getting worse in their growth rate. So these are going to run away. Hopefully, as we see there, let's just look at one of these, like Australia. If we look at the Australia graph over here, we can see that Australia has turned the corner. They're seeing a lot of below zero growth numbers in terms of new cases. And having turned the corner, though they're still trending upwards in the growth of deaths, we can expect that to peak in a few days. I'm never quite know how many days it's going to be from the peak of cases to the peak of deaths, but it seems like it's sometimes almost immediate. Sometimes they peak at the same time, and sometimes more than a week, but probably somewhere in that range. Maybe 5 days from now, we may see this peak in Australia, and fewer new deaths each day. On the bright side, Austria and Italy, all the green ones, it's all those green lines. Let's see, which one is this? Probably Turkey. Nope, this is the Czech Republic. Czech Republic, Austria, and Italy are, and let's just pick up one more, Spain. These all have nice trend lines in deaths, which indicate that the number of deaths is dropping day over day. And then there's the whole middle of the pack, where some are headed upwards, like Israel, and some are headed downwards, like Belgium, in their growth rate. But generally, the whole thing is woven together into this single rope that's headed straight to the right. We will need to see that go down before we can call any sort of a peak to the number of deaths for this epidemic. And that is the countries. So, moving on to the states of the United States, we have, as usual, New York's leading, New Jersey second in terms of total cases. Similarly, in terms of new cases, New York and New Jersey. It is nice to see a little bit of a bend to this line, as we'll see in later, see below. This is a sign that New York is peaking. It's not really obvious from this this line, but I think we'll see it more clearly in the growth. And it is obvious that this is not growing exponentially. It is peaking. It's flattening out. And similarly, let me look at New Jersey a little more closely because I think they have one weird point here. They have a point of new cases at 0. I'm sure New Jersey did not actually have 0 new cases on April 4th. So I'm not going to believe this trend line too much. There's the latest data point apparently doesn't seem to have come in, but the trend is certainly upwards. They have not peaked. California is looking up there in new cases. California used to be just a little state when it came to coronavirus. Now it's all grown up and contributing to the top 3. Michigan also is ahead of everyone except for the 2 big ones. And then there's this cluster here. I'm going to look though per capita. Per capita lets us compare the states better. New York still the leader, even per capita. We can easily imagine that New York may be passed by someone someday because the per capita it loses New York its population advantage when you show it in this graph. But even without that advantage, New York still wins this particular race. It has more per capita. Maybe it's its population density advantage that's also keeping it ahead. New Jersey, similarly. Louisiana, just a few days ago, someone asked me to look at Louisiana, and it wasn't really dominant in the graphs then. That was probably only 3 days ago, but look at it now. Per capita, Louisiana is number 3. You can see that they have one, or is this also Louisiana? Yeah, they've got a couple of data points that are just sky high, above New York, in fact. Louisiana doesn't win the trend wars, but it certainly has the highest single point on this graph. Let's just take a look at, well, that won't really show anything, will it? In the number of per capita new cases, 579 new cases per million. So what's that? No, that's half of a half. Not half of a percent, 1/10 of that, but 10,000 would be 1% of the population. So 500 is a 20th of a percent of the population got coronavirus in one day. So that's a fair slice of Louisiana. A little better the next day. Maybe we'll see it decrease. Louisiana is doing very good testing. So we should be able to find out who has it and keep them isolated so they don't infect other people. So per million, again, New York, New Jersey, Louisiana. We also have Massachusetts, Michigan, Connecticut. Illinois is probably, yeah, there's Illinois. Illinois and we just had it. Pennsylvania are the other ones, and then there's a cluster below that have cases, but not enough to figure prominently in the per capita graph. Now to the rope chart. One stands out here. Look, Louisiana. Let's just look at Louisiana. So there's the big trend here, really, obviously, is all these strands are headed downward. So that's good news. The United States is heading towards recovery. I keep forgetting to show the United States in the graph, I think. So I'm going to head back to the total number of cases and show the United States. The graph of the United States as a whole does trend downward. You may recall that back in around here, we were hoping it was hitting 0, and looking at the points to the left of that, it's reasonable to imagine that, but no, it has just kept ticking along with just a few small growth each day. The United States, 13% is not that small, but generally 5%, 5%, 4%, 8%. We're seeing these very small growths in the United States each day, but we have never seen one below 0. We've never seen a drop of the 3-day average in the United States. And so it's never going to go below 0 unless it actually has one of those low points. And every day I keep thinking today's the day where they're going to have a point down here or something, but not yet. So the United States is trending in a good direction. At this point, it looks like it's hitting zero April 6th, though every day it seems like it's hitting zero tomorrow. So we'll just have to watch and see what happens. But you can see where that trend comes from. All the states are moving almost in lockstep here. Let's zoom in. You look at them all together, and they're all just these parallel lines heading towards zero. Two of them below, New York and Colorado. Interesting. No, that's not Colorado. That's a data point from Colorado. But the line itself here is Michigan. Where is Colorado? Okay, Colorado. Colorado is in third place, heading to zero. Very soon looks likely to hit zero. You can see its latest point was actually below zero. That thing I was saying the United States hasn't done yet, of having a point below zero, Colorado has. Let's take a look at Colorado as a whole. Yeah, so this graph's looking good. There are not a lot of really high points anywhere up here. There aren't a lot of really low ones either, but we've seen a few below zero, and the trend line looks down. So Colorado seems to be turning the corner right now, getting over this, and we'll start to see fewer and fewer daily new cases if this trend continues in Colorado. So back to the big picture. Here again, we have all these downward lines. They're almost all parallel, heading downward, mostly still above zero though, which is why the United States is still above zero, because all the states are, except for a few. New York, being a really big state, will tend to pull the whole line below zero, even if most of these stay above. But since New York is only barely below zero, its gravity is not enough to pull the United States line down yet. But the outliers, three obvious ones, the orange ones. Louisiana, we've talked about, really doing poorly in terms of percent growth, 30% growth. Latest day, that's Nevada. Let's look at Louisiana because I can't find its latest day point. Oh, that's not so bad. It had 3 points that were pretty bad, and then it had this really good one, and one that's quite good, fairly good. 20% daily growth isn't that good, but it looks good compared to the 78 and the 50s that we had right before it. So Louisiana still headed upwards, but we can see a couple days of optimism here. That it's way too early to say that it's going to be turning downward, but it certainly has been pulled into more of a horizontal line by the latest days. So Louisiana as the outlier is growing, and its growth rate is growing. So not only is it running away exponentially, but it's also running away faster and faster, as opposed to, say, the next place, Virginia, which is still at 17% growth. That's a pretty bad daily growth rate. We're going to see lots of new cases if that continues. But at least its growth rate isn't growing. It's not heading down to zero yet to turn the corner, but at least it's not heading off into more and more new cases, a larger and larger increase of new cases each day. The other one, though, that is Washington. Interesting. Washington had a bad start of it, and then they seem to kind of get over it, kinda. At least they've had a number of days where their growth rate has dropped. They're just kind of all over the place right now. They don't have a huge number of cases, I don't think, each day. Let's see. So they're in the 600,000 new cases each day versus 10,000. They're still substantial. They're not one of the top 2 here, but they're in the middle of the pack. So they do have a fair number of cases each day. And in the past couple days, things have been not so good. 35%, 25%. Again, these are averages of 3 days growth rate. So Washington is another outlier. Washington State is not doing well and getting over this, and in fact is getting worse. And Nevada probably has the sharpest increase, sharpest angle upwards of all these. Also definitely in the midst of epidemic here, where though their growth rate at 12% isn't super alarming, it's headed in a direction where it'll become 20 in days and 30 in days if it doesn't flatten out and go down. Let's take a look at Nevada. I keep saying Nevada, but I hear it's Nevada. That's what I hear. Yeah, the last 2 days for Nevada have been pretty bad. 40% growth, almost 40% growth. So these are just 2 days. Its trend was good until the last 2 days, and now it's being pulled upwards again. We'll just have to watch that. It is, in terms of total number of cases, it's small, so there is a even more random factor in the noise is noisier, to use a technical term, for this if you have a small number of samples. But other than that, everything is looking good. We've got a good trend line downward. A few states have turned the corner. 3 or so aren't so good, but the rest are looking good. And again, it looks like, as a whole, the United States is going to turn the corner in a matter of a day or two. We keep saying that, though. Most of these predictions and trends have held steady, but the United States is somehow bending away from its trends, and its trend is getting worse. So hopefully the trend trends better. Here are the total test results per million by state. Total test results per million. It's nice to see that New York is not just the dominant force here. It used to be, as I recall, well above the pack. But Louisiana, which needs it, has been doing very well, has the sharpest upward angle here, and is testing a lot of people. As I've said, world-class testing is in the order of 4,000 to 8,000. I just use that term loosely to mean something like what South Korea was doing. And you can see that New York, with 14,000 per million tested, 1.4% of its population is tested. That's a lot, especially when you're New York. Louisiana has tested 1.2% of its population. Isn't that right? I think so. Washington State, which as we've seen is suffering something of a downturn or a loss of its comeback or something, is still doing 1.1% of its population tested. Massachusetts, almost 1% of the population, and New Jersey, 0.8% of the population. Looking good, looking good. Now, California, this is where I always say, oh, California, you're doing so terrible. I'm going to zoom in on California. Look at California. It is doing terrible in terms of its trend line, 900, where others are doing more than 10,000, 14,000. California is doing 900, but California claims, now that it has some new Stanford tests for antibodies and some other fancy things finally online, it claims that it's going to massively increase its testing rate. And look, we have one data point that confirms that. For one day only, with a low price of 3,000 tested per million, we have California finally moving into the big leagues here. California with almost 3,000 tested per million. Again, 4,000 is what I think of as kind of a minimum to really feel great about your testing. But having jumped from under 1,000 to 3,000 in one day, go California. I wait with bated breath for the April 5th number, because maybe it'll be 8,000. Who knows? But even if it's 3,000, that's oh so much better than it's been. And as we've seen, California is not in such great shape that it can sit back and relax. It is trending in the right direction in terms of new cases, but it's not yet dropped below zero in new cases, except for this latest day. I don't know if I pointed this out or looked at this, but California's latest day is actually below zero. It has 5% fewer cases in the latest average of 3 days. And then it has this great point. So it's a good day, April 4th. Remember this day, California. 2 great things happened on these graphs. Go California. And the new tests per million here again, California. South Carolina, interestingly, is another state that's really did well on April 4th. Let's look at South Carolina up here. South Carolina is not a major player in the total number of cases, but they're looking a bit like California here, where here they were do-doing their way along. 1,400 isn't terrible, but again, 4,000 is kind of a good number to shoot for. And suddenly, boom, here they are at about 4,000. So South Carolina also has rocketed to the top in testing per day. What also might have happened is they just finally got around to reporting testing they've been doing. So we'll see. We'll see what these look like. But if they actually have a sustained rate like that, South Carolina is going to stay at the bottom, I think. And California is going to successfully complete its turnaround. New York, it's doing all right. I mean, they're doing great, really. They're going on at 1,000 new tested per million. 1,000 new tested per million. Interesting. So yeah, 0.1% of their population is being tested every single day, and that, I guess it could be better, but that sounds pretty good to me. Other ones doing well: Louisiana again per capita, New Jersey, Massachusetts. Washington, for some reason, has leveled off in per capita testing, but they are still testing 700 per million, so that's not so bad, and then the rest is just a pack down there. Moving on to the counties. Okay. Oh, look, I got a comment. Colorado isn't really testing, says Cheryl Speckle. Who could that be? Hi, Cheryl Speckle. Hi, sister Cheryl Speckle. I have 35 subscribers, which makes me a world-class YouTuber, and it's all due to my sister Cheryl Speckle. Let's look at testing in Colorado. Colorado, right in the middle in terms of total cases. Testing of Colorado. Yeah, no one's writing home about these numbers, I don't think. 300 per million in new tests. Let's look at the total tests. 4,000 per million in total tests. That doesn't seem so bad, Cheryl Speckle. Where are we? Somewhere in here. I mean, no, it's not it's not the 14,000 that we've seen. But let's compare the two states that I spend substantial time in, Colorado and California. Now, you look at California that I've been complaining about. It's been terrible. The testing's been terrible. No other way to say it. And now suddenly the testing is almost credible. 3,000, great. But Colorado has been doing pretty well in testing. They're right at the point here of having done world-class testing. They're near the lower limit of what people say South Korea did, 4,000 to 8,000. So I'd say Colorado's doing all right, and they keep doing more. Let's take another look at here. Yeah, they've kind of leveled out, it looks like, in the number they're testing per day, but 300 per million per day. It's not great, but it has gradually gotten them to this place where we have 0.4% of the population tested. Really, I'd like to see 50% of the population tested, and that maybe it just isn't worth it to do that. But I would like to see a lot more testing than anyone's doing, if only just to make sure that we know who's got this virus. By the way, I have a business idea for you, anybody, because I'm sure I'll never get around to it. My ideas are mostly terrible, so I take what you will from it. But they keep talking about how once you've been tested, especially if you've been tested with an antibody test, like the Stanford antibody test, or there was another one as well, I think, that now you know you're immune. And so now in theory you can go to work, and in theory you should be able to go outside. You can't catch it from anyone, you can't give it to anyone. And so I want someone to make t-shirts that you can wear. They're talking about making some sort of license or badge or something, not a badge, but some sort of pass where you can wave it to the police and say, no, I'm allowed to be here on the beach because I've been tested and I have antibodies, and I'm not positive. I just have antibodies, so I actually can be out doing critical work, or waiting tables in a restaurant, or all the things that we're not allowed to do right now. So t-shirts. The answer is t-shirts. People should have t-shirts, something like "I survived COVID-19," and some sort of test number on it, maybe, that says what certifies you as positive. And I imagine these people walking around in bright neon shirts, and everyone knows that they're safe, and people walk up to them and hug them and say, I'm so happy I can touch a human being again, and they become mini celebrities. Either that or they all get deported. I don't know what would actually happen, ostracized and exiled. But there's a business idea for you. I survived COVID-19 T-shirts for those who have antibodies. Aha! I hear that Ryan Speckle has a T-shirt business. Well, pass that along to your son, Cheryl, and see what he thinks. It might be a real business, you know? Who knows? I would be happy to see such people walking the world wearing special T-shirts, special colored pattern, something so you know that these are the very special people who can't get the virus. Moving on to the counties of California. Los Angeles, as always, dominates in total cases. No one else is even close. Santa Clara, San Diego, Orange County, they try, but no one can be Los Angeles, really, in this world. Similarly, new daily cases, Los Angeles continues. It wouldn't be so bad to be the leader if everyone else were catching up to you in the virus, but yeah, we are, right now, Los Angeles is still getting more new cases than anyone else. And in terms of new cases, San Diego, Riverside, Orange, but the whole pack is there below Los Angeles. Cases per million, I've already zoomed in here from that earlier moment, so let me zoom back out. Well, at least Los Angeles has one competitor here, San Mateo, in new daily cases per million. I thought San Mateo was doing well. Okay, well, once you compensate for Los Angeles' enormous size, it rejoins the pack in places like San Mateo, even though the curve seems to be flattening out in San Mateo. Is it really? Well, it's got some recent new high days, so we'll see about San Mateo on the next graph. Los Angeles is still leading, even per capita, like New York, but not as bad as New York. Compensating for the population doesn't suddenly put in the middle of the pack. It's still at the top. Riverside also is in the top of new cases per capita. And Kern. San Francisco, nice to see a few of these. A few of these have clearly turned the corner. A few days ago, I was pointing at some of these and saying, look how the growth rate is reaching zero and dropping below zero. They should turn the corner and their new daily cases should drop. And indeed, lo and behold, Santa Clara County, you can see it heading right down there, cutting across the grain of all these other ones that are heading upwards. I'm going to zoom in a little bit more so I can see more clearly which ones these are. The ones that are, and this will be really obvious in the next slides. But a lot of counties of California are not having this upward. Most of them are going upward in a way we don't really love. But down here we have San Luis Obispo turning around. We have San Joaquin turning around, heading downward, and fewer new cases per day. Santa Clara, a large county, so that's a big deal in terms of the total number. And San Francisco even flattening out, not quite turning downward yet, but a lot of these are flattening out. On the other hand, we have Tulare. Tulare is a relatively small county, at least in contribution of coronavirus cases, but it has the sharpest upward trend. But let's look at where we can see all this better, the growth chart, the rope chart. Here in the rope chart, first of all, let's take a look at this San Bernardino. Yeah, we'll just look at that. San Bernardino is substantial in its cases, and also it's kind of an outlier in its shape. It had some pretty bad days back in March 20th time, where it was seeing 45%, 40% growth rate day over day, lots and lots of cases, which is why probably it's managed to work its way to the middle of the pack here. But look at San Bernardino now. It had a few good days here, a little bit of a maybe upward trend, but the latest day is really good. And so it's the overall trend. It's hard to really say with points this widely spaced, but the overall trend appears to be positive. It certainly had one good day, and that again is an average. Is that an average? I think that's an average of 3 days. But San Bernardino seems to have turned the corner and is heading towards negative growth after a wild ride a few weeks ago. Most of the counties, no, there's no real most here. This is pretty flat overall, I think. When I look at this rope, I say that's heading pretty much straight to the right. Maybe it's got a little bit of a downward. Actually, I'm gonna pull back out of what I was just doing. If you look at the latest day, even in recent days, when we were looking at who was below zero and above zero, who had turned the corner and who hadn't, there was this sense that most of the counties had not turned the corner, were above the zero line. Now, if you zoom in, you can see there are a lot of them, a lot of California counties that are showing negative growth day over day in new cases. A lot that show positive growth, but it's almost 50-50. So California as a whole, I don't remember now what we said about California as a whole. California as a whole, these are the new daily cases. California as a whole, it really isn't obviously hitting zero here. So maybe the reason that this seems to be kind of headed to zero, whereas the state as a whole isn't, it may have to do with population. So let's look at just the top 5 and see what the top 5 of California are looking like. The top 5 counties in new cases. So when you look at the top 5, you can definitely believe that this is you also can believe that California is starting to turn a corner. 3 of them are solidly below zero: San Francisco, Orange County, and Santa Clara. 2 of them are solidly above: San Diego, Los Angeles. Let's bring in San Mateo here. San Mateo also below zero. Alameda. All right. Riverside. Okay, so it's a mixed bag. It's still just a mixed bag. Riverside is still heading in a good direction after having a pretty bad time of it a few weeks ago, or a week ago even. Alameda is certainly not heading in a good direction with a 15% growth rate and getting worse all the time. Los Angeles is at least heading in a positive direction, which just a few days ago it didn't look like it was. Let's take a closer look at Los Angeles. Yeah, it's really not totally obvious from all the points scattered here that this is a downward trend line, but it's somewhat believable. We've had a couple of good days and one that wasn't too bad, and then that really good day that pulled the peak of that thing down entirely. I think one could imagine that Los Angeles is getting better. Certainly it's been better than it just a week ago when it was just shooting through the roof. So Los Angeles seems to be heading in the direction of turning the corner. That's a couple of things removed from getting over the epidemic. In order to get over the epidemic, first of all, it has to turn this curve downward, which it's probably doing. Secondly, the curve has to hit zero so that its growth ceases. So finally, it has to go below, or next it has to go below zero so that the new growths, it starts having fewer and fewer new cases. And then once it gets there, then finally we'll see the total number of cases level off at whatever it's the total ends up being. So Los Angeles is maybe on step 1 or 2 of about a 4-step process to get over the epidemic, but at least it's turning its curve south here. All right, so those are the counties. Again, ask in the chat, ask in the chat if you want to know more. That is total testing. We still don't have any sort of reasonable. Let's just check real quick. We have testing for all these, for some countries. Orange County actually has testing numbers, Santa Barbara, Monterey. But these are all such small counties. Orange County testing at a rate of 3,000 per million. Marin is doing very good testing. Kern is doing good testing. Santa Barbara also is doing pretty good testing. None of them up to world-class testing of the 4,000 mark that I like to think of world-class testing, except Kern. Interesting that Kern is the one doing that. But we can't compare here because most of these counties are not reporting testing numbers in this data set. So all we can do is look at the individual counties and say, how do they compare to, say, the States or to South Korea? So I think we're done here. That is the country, state, and county data for the 5th 5th. Yes, for April 5th, 2020. My name is Greg Farrar. Thank you to Joby Aviation for funding this, my employer. Thank you to Databricks and Plotly for providing some of the tools I'm using here. Thank you for Corona Data Scraper and, let's see, there was another, let me just get my attributions right, Our World in Data and COVID Tracking, that's the new one, covidtracking.com for the testing result data. Things are looking pretty good, I'd say. Pretty good. Things are looking pretty good. We're still in the middle of this, but we can see everything is headed in the right direction. Individual hotspots, not so much, but on the whole, things are headed in the right direction. Still definitely worth tracking all this, though, because as we've seen with the United States and with some other places, trends can change. I'll be back tomorrow. Thanks for watching.